Hello, in this video we will be walking over a more realistic example with a template that you can use to quickly get started. This is the level map 100 by 100. So these nodes are already predefined and ready to go, and I'll walk through why the nodes are set up the way they are. This particular configuration works best with a 100 by 100 tile map. As you start creating more trees, you will notice that some of them are more suited for smaller map sizes or bigger map sizes, and it's based on how they turn out. So for example, if we do this one right, it looks fairly well for a 100 by 100 tile map. But once we start going maybe a little smaller, say 50 by 50, um, it still looks fairly good, but it seems a little incomplete in my opinion. Like we get this kind of middle island that looks a little off, a little bit more suited for a bigger map. So now that we've seen what kind of map we're generating here, so something that looks along the lines of this, I will show how these all come to be and why we set the things we did so that it looks in this particular configuration. To get an understanding of this tree, I think it's best to go at it layer by layer, and I think this is how you want to be thinking about your maps as you create them. So starting off from the base layer is what I like to call. So here we are creating two simple base layers, which would be the beach and then the grass area here. And then a good way to look at these would be to just disable the other tile maps. So as our base layer, this is what we're getting here. And this one's fairly simple to understand. It's just grass and beach. And then in this case, the determining factor is the humidity. Minimum temperature and elevation, we kind of disregard, and we're only interested in the humidity. So if it's higher humidity, we'll do a more beach biome. And then if it's a little bit low or kind of mid humidity, we'll do a grass biome. And this will be our basis for our layers that we then build on top of those biomes. So going to the beach biome, just because that was a little quicker, we can go into a water biome. In this case, so if we enable the second layer, right, this case we don't see any water biomes on top of the beach. So in this one, unfortunately for our random generation, we did not see it, but we should see it in some maps, and I'll point it out once we do. And this one was also determined by just the humidity. So a higher humidity gave us water tiles on top of the beach. Now for the grass biome, for the second layer, we have three different possibilities. So we also have a water biome that can be on top of the grass biome. So here we could be like a lake would be the example here, right? But then other grass biome. So that's also a possibility. And then this one is a little bit more complex just because there's three different types of biome and it adds a little bit of complexity and just variability. And so I've made these dependent on the humidity and the elevation. So we've done lower elevation, low to mid elevation, and then high humidity for a lake appearing. Now for our forest biome here, this is related to more of like a mountain landscape. As you see here, this is where we're starting to add visual elevation into our biome. And this is why we have our minimum elevation being 0.75 and our max elevation being 1. And then the last one here is more decorations. Here, as you'll notice, there's no object here or no tile being used for this particular biome, just because it's being used as a placeholder for two possible decorations, in this case being trees and then grass decor. So this is kind of a little bit of a hack that you can do to kind of set a placeholder for more than one possible biomes for a particular layer. And that wraps up our second layer here. So we would be seeing water on top of the beach, we could see water on top of the grass, or we could do a little bit of elevation, which is what we see here, and then our placeholder for a future decorations on top of that. And if we go to the third layer here, this is where all the decorations, which would be these here, which is in this case the flowers and the mushrooms that you see here, and then the trees that appear here as well. And then we also have our rock decor, and then further adding another layer on top of the elevation. So we have our rocks that come up on top of the elevation only because it is a child element of that forest elevation child. See if we can generate a tile map that has some of those specific examples. So here is the lake on top of the grass. Oh, here we go. There's the water on top of the beach. And then here we have a little bit of a second cliff, right? This would be this one here. We have another elevation on top of the already existing elevation. Now that we've walked through all the layers and have an understanding of what goes on in each one, we can then start to do some further customizations or some adjustments to this template based on what type of map you want to generate. For example, if you want to lean more towards having a more sandy beach biome, we can change the constraints within our humidity here to allow for it to be more lenient towards producing a more beach biome over a grass biome. So how that would look like would be either we can modify the humidity noise to be more lenient towards a higher humidity, or we can simply modify the minimum humidity here. So we set it lower, right? That means we're covering more area for our beach biome. If we do that, we generate a higher probability of generating that beach biome that we want. And then another example here would be if we like the cliffs and we want that to be a bigger part within our map, we could do something similar. So again, we can modify the elevation noise to make it more lenient towards higher elevations, or we can lower the elevation here. So maybe like a 0.5 for our base elevation, and then maybe like a 0.8 for our second layer of elevation here. Of course, we would also have to modify our rock decorations here to kind of align with these changes here. But as a quick example here, here we go. So you see we generate a lot more cliff areas within our map. And then we have a little bit more of that second layer appearing as well. So here is that second elevation that comes out after these changes. And then of course you can always just add more child elements. So we could add another decoration on top of our existing, say, grass and tree decor. We could add a different type of decoration here and then make it so that it's maybe blended in within our grass decoration here, or it's a little bit more segregated and completely different from here. So if we look at our maps here being generated currently, let me look at a good example. See, we see a lot of empty space in some areas. Maybe we could create a child node here that has these constraints that fit more of these empty spaces and create some type of decoration that comes out in these areas. Another thing we can play around with are the strategies, right? Most of them are using similarity strategy, which just kind of ensures that at least some of these biomes are being generated and there's a good blend between them. For this one here in the grass decor, we're doing a random strategy. So this makes it so it's a little bit more sparsed out and just kind of randomly laid out. So if we were to change this, say, to the similarity strategy, we see a lot less blending between these two child elements here. So here we get a more coherent and cohesive grass decorations. Another thing we could change is the rule tiles themselves. So I haven't showed those yet, but those are also doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the maps here. So for example, the single decor one, So this is generating our flowers, and based on how they're being laid out, we are generating little clusters. So here we see that it's kind of looking a little bit more coherent based on how they're being clustered together, based on our rule tile. So it looks a lot nicer than just setting the tiles um, one at a time, and specifically the same tile every time we're doing it. Same thing with the mushrooms here. So we don't have one specific mushroom coming out. We have a set of different random mushrooms that come out so that we get a little bit of variability and it looks a little bit more realistic. Or if you're going for just a particular biome where it's just the same mushroom, you can just leave it as one particular mushroom. And then for tree as well, we have our own rules, which is setting it so that we are able to have that layered look between the trees. So here, that overlapping there. And then of course for our cliffs, we are setting the rule tiles so that it looks like a cluster of a cliff and we see those edges where our biome for that cliff ends. So yeah, so we see the cliffs and then maybe we see a path going up towards the cliff so we can go into that elevation. So as you've seen, this map and many more will rely on multiple components working together. That would be like the layers that come within the tree, the noises that we're using to generate the biomes, the tiles we're using, whether it's a rule tile or a simple sprite tile, those also can do a lot of the heavy lifting on how your map finally looks. And then the constraints, which also kind of sets up spaces for a particular layer, and then the strategy we're using to determine within that layer which of these, say for example, these childs are being used at that particular coordinate. As a final reminder, don't be afraid to go into the scene and make changes based on your particular style. These maps, for the most part, aren't always 100% complete, right? There's always little kinks that you need to make sure you solve or you don't particularly like, or maybe you do like an area, like say you like these cliffs going on here and I want to expand it and make it bigger within my map. If I have the tile, I could expand it and make it bigger, or if I don't like it, I could delete it, right? So at the end of the day, the map comes down to you. This tool is just here to help you get started and give you a general idea of where your map should be headed. But you make the final decision and final call on what's a good map and what's not.